The Cuban Missile Crisis nearly vaporized 100 million people in 1962, all because of a single misread psychological bluff. Declassified documents now reveal how a cascade of misunderstandings, broken communication lines, and Cold War brinkmanship brought humanity within seconds of accidental doomsday. Not because anyone wanted nuclear war, but because almost no one had accurate information about what was actually happening. This is the story of the classified near misses of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the handful of people who stopped the world from ending through psychological negotiations, sometimes by sheer luck, and once by the stubborn refusal of a single man aboard a sweltering Soviet submarine. Let's start with what the United States didn't know, because what you don't know can kill everyone. In July of 1962, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev and Cuban leader Fidel Castro struck a secret agreement to place nuclear missiles on the island of Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. The goal was deterrence. The Soviets feared an American invasion of Cuba, and the Americans had already tried once at the Bay of Pigs. Khrushchev's answer was to make an invasion unthinkable by parking nuclear warheads in America's backyard. 36 medium-range ballistic missiles and 24 launchers shipped to Cuba. Nearly 42,000 Soviet soldiers accompanied them, most disguised in civilian clothes. They were introduced to the Cuban population as agricultural specialists. Nobody was convinced. And here's the critical detail that didn't surface until decades later. The Soviets had also deployed 100 tactical nuclear weapons to the island. These weren't the big intercontinental missiles. These were battlefield weapons. The local Soviet commander in Cuba had the authority to launch them without additional codes or orders from Moscow. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara had told President Kennedy there were 6,000 to 8,000 Soviet technicians on the island. The real number was 43,000 armed combat troops, backed by nuclear weapons they could fire on their own authority. The Americans were flying blind, and they were about to make decisions that could end civilization based on profoundly wrong information. On October 14th, a U-2 spy plane photographed missile sites under construction in Cuba. The images hit the White House the next day. Kennedy assembled a secret advisory group called ExComm, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. For 6 days, they debated in private while the public had no idea how close the world was teetering toward annihilation. The Joint Chiefs of Staff pushed hard for a military strike, an air assault followed by a full ground invasion. Had Kennedy listened, American troops would have stormed an island bristling with tactical nuclear weapons that Soviet field commanders were authorized to use independently. Castro himself later acknowledged he believed everyone in Cuba would die in such a scenario, and he was prepared to accept that. Instead, Kennedy chose a naval quarantine. On October 22nd, he addressed the nation on live television, revealing the missiles and announcing the blockade. Soviet ships were en route to Cuba. If they didn't turn back, the confrontation would escalate. This was Cold War brinkmanship at its most dangerous, both sides issuing threats with escalating force, each trying to read the other's psychology without a reliable way to communicate. The Moscow-Washington hotline didn't exist yet in 1962. Messages traveled through intermediaries, ambassadors, back channels, and public broadcasts. Attorney General Robert Kennedy conducted secret negotiations with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin, using psychological tactics and carefully crafted diplomatic language to find compromise. Misreadings were inevitable. Then came October 27th, Black Saturday, the single most dangerous day in human history. That morning, Kennedy woke up believing a resolution was close. Khrushchev had sent a letter the night before offering to remove the missiles if the US pledged never to invade Cuba. But overnight, a second letter arrived with a harder demand. The US must also remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey. The tone had shifted. The psychological warfare tactics employed by both sides had created a fog so thick that neither leader could be certain what the other actually wanted. Kennedy's advisors employed what historians call the trollop ploy, a calculated piece of reverse psychology. They responded to Khrushchev's first, more reasonable letter while completely ignoring the second, harder demand. This psychological negotiation tactic forced Khrushchev to choose: accept the original deal or escalate further. And then, in the span of a few hours, 3 separate incidents nearly triggered nuclear war. First, A U-2 reconnaissance plane piloted by Major Rudolf Anderson was shot down over Cuba by a Soviet surface-to-air missile. Anderson was killed, the only combat casualty of the crisis. The shoot-down hadn't been authorized by Moscow. A local Soviet commander made the call independently. The Joint Chiefs immediately pressed Kennedy for retaliatory airstrikes. Kennedy refused. He wanted to understand what had happened before responding with force. Second, another U-2 pilot, Major Chuck Maltzby, was on a routine mission collecting air samples near the North Pole to monitor Soviet nuclear tests. Disoriented by the aurora borealis, he strayed more than 300 miles into Soviet airspace. Soviet fighter jets scrambled to intercept him. American F-102 fighters, armed with nuclear air-to-air missiles, launched to escort him home. For a tense stretch of minutes, nuclear-armed American and Soviet aircraft were converging on the same patch of sky. Kennedy learned of the incident and responded with dark humor. There is always some son of a bitch who doesn't get the word. But the third incident was the closest call of all, and the world didn't learn about it for decades. 4 Soviet Foxtrot-class diesel submarines had departed the Kola Bay on October 1st, heading for Cuba. Each carried a nuclear-armed torpedo with the explosive power of the Hiroshima bomb. Submarine B-59, under the command of Captain Valentin Savitsky, had been tracked by the U.S. Navy destroyer USS Randolph and was being bombarded with signaling depth charges designed to force it to surface. Inside B-59, conditions were hellish. The ventilation system had failed. Temperatures soared above 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Carbon dioxide levels climbed until the crew could barely breathe. They had lost radio contact with Moscow for days. They had no idea whether war had already started on the surface. Captain Valentin Savitsky cracked. "Maybe the war has already started," he said. "We're going to blast them now. We will die, but we will sink them all. We will not disgrace our Navy." Soviet protocol required all 3 senior officers aboard to agree before launching a nuclear torpedo. Savitsky wanted to fire. Political officer Ivan Maslenikov agreed. 2 out of 3. The third man was Vasily Arkhipov, executive officer of B-59 and chief of staff of the entire submarine flotilla. Arkhipov said no. He argued that if a full-scale war had actually started, the Americans wouldn't be wasting time harassing a single diesel submarine. They'd be launching everything they had. The depth charges weren't an attack. They were a signal. Arkhipov convinced Savitsky to surface and await orders. That decision, made in a suffocating metal tube at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, almost certainly saved civilization. Thomas Blanton, director of the National Security Archive, put it simply in 2002. A guy called Vasily Arkhipov saved the world. Historian Arthur Schlesinger later called it the most dangerous moment in human history. When the surviving submarine crews returned to the Soviet Union, they weren't treated as heroes. One admiral told them it would have been better if they'd gone down with their ships. The crisis ended the next day. On October 28th, Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles. In return, Kennedy pledged not to invade Cuba and, in a secret side deal that remained classified for 25 years, agreed to withdraw American Jupiter missiles from Turkey. The psychological brinkmanship had worked, but barely. The crisis's aftermath led directly to the establishment of the Moscow-Washington Hotline in 1963 and the Limited Test Ban Treaty, both designed to prevent such dangerous miscommunication in the future. Kennedy later estimated the odds of the crisis escalating to nuclear war at between 1 in 3 and even. Former Secretary of Defense William Perry pointed out that Kennedy's estimate was actually optimistic because he didn't know about the 100 tactical nuclear weapons on Cuba or the Soviet commander's authority to use them independently. What the declassified record makes unmistakably clear is that crisis management is largely a myth. Accurate information, the most essential ingredient, is always the thing you don't have. During those 13 days, good luck substituted for good judgment again and again and again. The Cuban Missile Crisis didn't just reveal the dangers of nuclear weapons, it revealed the danger of human beings trying to read each other's minds across an ocean through layers of ideology and distrust, with the fate of every living person hanging on the result. The documents prove it. We almost nuked ourselves, and we were saved in the end, not by strategy or statecraft, but by psychological negotiations and one man in a submarine who kept his head when everyone around him had lost theirs.